The folder slid across the Christmas table so softly it almost made no sound at all. Daniel's mother pushed it with 2 fingers right between the dish of candied yams and the basket of dinner rolls, as if she were offering me something polite. Her smile stayed in place, neat and cold. "We think this is best," she said, "before the wedding moves forward." For a second, nobody moved. The lights on the tree in the corner blinked red gold, red gold. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer ticked. Daniel looked down at his plate. His father folded his hands like this was a business meeting instead of Christmas dinner. His sister took a sip of wine and tried not to look interested. I rested my hand on the folder but did not open it right away. Even before I saw the title on the first page, I knew what it was. A contract. Not the kind people use when they want fairness, the kind they use when they want to remind you where they think you belong. By then, I had spent nearly 20 years in the Marine Corps. I had stood in rooms where generals made decisions that carried the weight of life and death. I had buried good men. I had written letters to families. I had learned how power worked, and more important, how small people acted when they believed someone else had none. Still sitting at that Christmas table in my oldest wool coat, I felt something sharper than anger. Not because of the paper. Because Daniel had known. I could see it in the way he would not lift his eyes. That was the moment. That was the night. That was the second I understood that before I married this man, I needed to decide whether love was enough when courage was missing. But that was not where the story began. It began 3 weeks earlier on a gray December morning with Daniel standing in my kitchen holding a mug of coffee and smiling at me like the world was still simple. "I want you to come to Christmas dinner," he said. "My parents are finally ready to meet you properly." I was standing at the counter in stocking feet reading an early briefing packet before heading to base. The townhouse I owned in a quiet neighborhood outside Quantico was warm, plain, and tidy. No expensive art, no dramatic furniture, no sign to an ordinary eye that the woman living there earned a solid military salary and carried a rank most men twice her age never reached. I kept my life that way on purpose. Daniel thought I worked in an administrative office connected to the base. He had never said the word clerk with disrespect. In fact, he always said it kindly as though he admired that I was steady and unpretentious. He believed I handled paperwork reports, scheduling, something small, something quiet. I had let him believe that. Not because I enjoyed deceit. I did not. But after years of being saluted, deferred to, studied, and judged by rank, I had grown hungry for the one thing authority never seemed to bring me: unguarded affection. I wanted one person in my life who saw me before he saw the stars on my collar. So I had never corrected him. I was 38 years old, a major general in the United States Marine Corps with responsibilities that would have startled him if he had known them all. My monthly pay was a little over $18,000 before taxes and deductions. I had my own home, my own retirement, my own investments, and enough savings that I could have walked away from the service tomorrow and lived modestly for the rest of my life. But none of that interested me half as much as character did. "Properly?" I asked. Daniel laughed. "You know what I mean." I looked up from the packet. "I thought I'd already met them properly." "You met them at that fundraiser for 10 minutes and my mother was distracted," he said. "This will be different. Just family, Christmas, relaxed." I remember the little pause I took before answering. Daniel noticed it too. "What?" he asked. "Your mother didn't seem distracted," I said. "She seemed disappointed." He gave me that helpless half-smile of his, the one meant to smooth over discomfort without ever truly facing it. "She just doesn't know you yet." That was Daniel's way. He was a good man in many of the daily, ordinary senses. He remembered how I took my coffee. He checked the oil in my car without telling me. He took his suit jackets to the dry cleaner on time and sent flowers to widows from church. He called his aunt every Sunday. He would bring in my grocery bags without being asked. But Daniel had been raised in a family where keeping the peace mattered more than speaking plain truth. Around his parents especially, he softened himself into someone smaller. He did not lie exactly. He just let things go unchallenged until they hardened into facts. "When is dinner?" I asked. "Christmas Eve," he said. "My sister and her husband will be there too." I set down the packet and turned fully toward him. "And what exactly have you told them about me?" His eyebrows lifted too quickly. That you work on base. That's all. He shrugged, more or less. It would have been easy then to tell him. To say, Daniel, I am not an office clerk. I am a Marine Corps Major General, and if your parents want to know whether I can support myself, the answer is yes. But something in me resisted. Not pride, curiosity. By then, I had spent enough time around wealth, real wealth inherited, wealth, anxious wealth, to know that many people were not measured by what they had, but by how they treated those who seemed to have less. Daniel's family came from old East Coast comfort. Not dynastic riches, but the sort of money that lived in country club memberships, careful haircuts, and a belief that family reputation had to be protected from embarrassment. I had watched women like his mother my whole life, sweet voice, sharp eyes, generous in public, exacting in private. And I suddenly knew I wanted to see something clearly before I married her son. All right, I said, I'll come. He smiled with relief and came over to kiss my forehead. You'll see, it'll be nice. I smiled back, but I did not answer. After he left for work, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, the packet forgotten my coffee cooling in my hand. Then I went upstairs, opened my closet, and looked past the tailored coats and good wool dresses I wore for formal military functions when appropriate. I chose the oldest coat I owned. Brown wool. Still decent, but worn thin at the cuffs. A coat my mother would have called respectable, and other women might have called tired. My mother had raised me in a small town in North Carolina. My father died when I was young, and my mother worked in the county records office for 26 years, wearing sensible shoes, and keeping every receipt in an envelope marked by month. She used to tell me, a person with good character doesn't need to announce herself. The world will eventually do the announcing for her. She also used to say, if you really want to know who people are, let them think you can't do a thing for them. I heard her voice that morning as clear as church bells. So I made a decision. I would go to Christmas dinner dressed plainly. No jewelry beyond my watch. No polished authority, no hints. I would keep my voice soft, answer briefly, and let them decide who I was. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. Because I wanted truth. The weeks before Christmas passed in the usual blur of duty and December obligations. There were ceremonies, budget meetings, personnel reviews, and the annual ache that settles over military communities during the holidays, when everyone is mindful of who is deployed, who is grieving, who is coming home, and who is not. In public, I carried myself as I always did, calm, direct, self-contained. On base, people stood when I entered a room. Men twice my age chose their words carefully around me. In one afternoon, I might approve travel review, a disciplinary recommendation, and call the widow of a staff officer. By evening, I was home watering a small fern near my living room window and heating soup on the stove. It suited me. Daniel came by often. We decorated my little artificial Christmas tree one Sunday afternoon. He brought peppermint bark from a local shop. He talked about his office Christmas party, his niece's choir concert, his mother's obsession with the table setting this year. She has special china she only uses on Christmas Eve, he said. My dad carves the ham like it's a ceremony. Sounds lovely, I said. He hesitated. You're nervous? No, I said. I'm observant. He laughed, but something in his face tightened. A few nights later, he was flipping through channels in my living room when he said too casually, "If my parents ask about your future, don't take it personally." I looked over from the armchair where I was mending a loose button on a cardigan. What does that mean? You know, they're practical people. Practical about what? He shifted. Marriage, finances, stability. I threaded the needle slowly. Daniel, do your parents think I'm unstable? No, he sat up. Not unstable, just they like to know where things stand. That was the second warning. Enough that any sensible woman would have pressed harder. I did not. I only nodded and kept sewing. The afternoon of Christmas Eve was bright and cold. I dressed carefully in the role I had chosen. Dark skirt, plain blouse, low heels, my oldest coat, no earrings, no makeup beyond what was necessary not to look tired. I pinned my hair simply and left it that way. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A quiet woman, pleasant enough, forgettable if you were foolish. Daniel picked me up just before 5. He was wearing a navy sweater and looked handsome in the open, earnest way that had first drawn me to him. He carried a pie I had baked, and complimented my coat, which told me he truly did not see what I was doing. On the drive to his parents' house, Christmas lights glowed across front porches and shrubs. Maryland suburbs at Christmas time have a particular kind of order to them, wreaths on every other door, neat lawns gone brown for winter candles glowing in front windows, the feeling that people are trying very hard to produce warmth on schedule. Daniel reached over and touched my hand. "Thank you for doing this." "Of course," I said. "You'll like them more once you know them." I turned my face toward the passing dark outside the window. Maybe. Their house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, large without being vulgar. White columns, green shutters, brass lantern by the door. The sort of place that had hosted many holidays and wanted you to notice it had done so successfully. Daniel parked in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see the glow of a tall tree and the movement of figures inside. I took one breath, then another. Not because I was afraid of them, because I knew with the strange stillness that sometimes comes before a storm that this night was going to tell me something final. Daniel came around to open my door pie in one hand, smile in place. I stepped out, buttoned my old coat against the cold, and walked with him to the front porch. From inside I could already hear laughter. Then the door opened. The woman who opened the door smiled the way people do when they've already made up their mind. "Daniel," she said warmly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Then her eyes moved to me, quick and measuring. "And this must be... you." Her voice lingered on the last word just a fraction too long. "Mom, this is Daniel," began. "I remember," she said, cutting him off gently. "We met briefly." She stepped aside to let us in. The house was exactly what I expected: polished hardwood floors, a tall Christmas tree dressed in gold and glass, the faint scent of cinnamon and baked ham in the air. Everything was arranged just so the way people arrange a life they want others to admire. "Take your coat," she said, reaching for mine. I hesitated for the smallest moment, then let her. Her fingers brushed the sleeve, and I saw the almost invisible flicker in her expression when she felt the worn wool. Not disgust, not quite. Just confirmation. She hung it carefully as though it might shed. "This way," she said. We moved into the living room where Daniel's father stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. He was a tall man in his 70s, straight-backed, with the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of believing he has earned his place in every room. "Dad," Daniel said, "this is..." "Yes, yes," his father replied, extending his hand to me. "Welcome." His grip was firm, his smile practiced. His eyes, like his wife's, did their work quickly, taking in my clothes, my shoes, my posture. "Good to finally have you here," he added. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. Behind him, a younger woman approached, carrying a glass of wine, Daniel's sister. She was dressed beautifully, her hair done, her smile bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "So this is the mystery woman," she said lightly. "I've heard so much." I doubted that. Her husband followed a step behind, quieter, observing. "Can I get you something to drink?" Daniel's mother asked. "Water would be fine," I said. "Just water," the sister asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "It's Christmas." "I'm driving later," I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it was simple. His mother returned with a glass of water and handed it to me with careful politeness. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Why don't we sit?" We moved into the living room. Conversation began easily enough, but not naturally. Questions came my way, but they were shaped in a certain direction. "So Daniel tells us you work on base," his father said, settling into his chair. "Yes," I said. "What kind of work?" he asked. "Administrative," I answered. He nodded slowly, as if placing that into a category he understood completely. "That must be steady," he said. "It is," I replied. His sister leaned forward slightly. "Do you enjoy it?" "I value the structure," I said. That seemed to satisfy her, or at least confirm whatever she had already decided. Daniel tried to keep the conversation moving. He talked about work, about a project he was finishing, about a trip they might take in the spring. His mother listened, smiling at him, nodding her attention warm and full when it rested on her son. When it returned to me, it cooled. "And your family?" she asked. "My mother passed a few years ago," I said. "I don't have any siblings." "Oh," she said softly, tilting her head. "That must be difficult." "It was," I said. There was a pause, not of sympathy, of recalibration. "Less family, less support, less structure?" His father cleared his throat. "Well, it's good you have Daniel now." I took a sip of water. Yes, I said evenly. It is. Dinner was announced a moment later and we moved into the dining room. The table was set beautifully. White china with a delicate gold rim. Crystal glasses. Cloth napkins folded just so. A centerpiece of pine branches and candles. It was the kind of table my mother would have admired and then quietly worried about scratching. We took our seats. Daniel sat beside me, his parents across, his sister and her husband at either end. The meal began with grace. His father bowed his head and gave thanks for family, for blessings for the year behind and the year ahead. His words were sincere, practiced, and complete. When he finished, everyone lifted their heads. Please, his mother said, eat. The food was good, very good. Ham glazed perfectly, sweet potatoes rich and soft, green beans with almonds, rolls warm and light, everything prepared with care. But the conversation never settled. So his mother said after a few minutes, turning to me again, "Do you plan to continue working after the wedding?" "Yes," I said. "In the same position?" she asked. "For now," I replied. She nodded, exchanging a brief glance with her husband. "I only ask," she continued, "because Daniel has worked very hard to build a certain lifestyle. Stability is important." "I agree," I said. His sister smiled faintly. "Of course, sometimes priorities shift after marriage." "Sometimes," I said. Daniel shifted beside me. I could feel the tension in his arm. "They're just trying to get to know you," he murmured quietly. "I understand," I said. His father set down his fork. "And what about long-term plans?" he asked. "Savings, retirement, those sorts of things." "I have a plan," I said. He smiled thinly. "I'm sure you do. It's just that, well, these things matter more when two people are building a life together." "Yes," I said again, "they do." There it was. Not outright insult, not yet. But the steady shaping of a narrative. A woman with modest means, limited prospects, a potential risk. Daniel tried to shift the subject again, but his mother brought it back. "We've seen situations before," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "where intentions are good, but differences in background can create complications." I looked at her. "What kind of complications?" "Oh," she said lightly, "expectations, financial habits, responsibilities." "And how those are shared," his father added. I folded my hands in my lap. "Shared how?" His mother smiled, equitably. The word hung in the air. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, it's a reasonable conversation," she said. "Yes," I said calmly, "it is." And then it happened. His father leaned back slightly. His mother reached beside her chair. The room quieted in a way that had nothing to do with the food. She placed a folder on the table, and with 2 fingers she slid it toward me. "We think this is best," she said, "before the wedding moves forward." This time I did not wait. I opened it. The first page was exactly what I expected. A prenuptial agreement. But as I read, I saw more than legal language. I saw assumptions. That I would contribute little, that I might depend, that I might take, that I needed to be managed before I could become part of their family. I read each line carefully. No one spoke. When I reached the end of the first page, I turned it. There were notes in the margin, in his mother's handwriting. "Important, must discuss before venue deposit." I closed the folder slowly, and only then did I look up. Daniel was staring at his plate. He hadn't said a word. I rested my hands lightly on the table, and for the first time that evening I allowed a small silence to settle. Not the silence of discomfort. The silence of understanding. They thought this was about money. They thought this was about protection. They thought I was the risk. I looked at Daniel, then at his parents, and I realized something with perfect clarity. This was not the moment I had been invited into their family. This was the moment they had decided who I was allowed to be. They had just made their move. They had no idea they had just chosen the wrong woman. I let the silence sit a moment longer than most people would have. Long enough for discomfort to settle into the room. Long enough for each of them to wonder how I would react. Then I placed my fingertips lightly on the edge of the folder and said very calmly, "When was this drafted?" Daniel's mother straightened a fraction, a few weeks ago. I turned my eyes to Daniel. "You knew about it." He swallowed. "We talked about it. I didn't think." "You didn't think I should be told?" I asked. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "I just didn't want to upset you before the holidays." His father leaned forward slightly. "There's no need to make this adversarial. This is simply a precaution. Standard, really. Standard for whom, I asked. For families in our position, he said. I nodded once as if that answered something. And what position is that, I asked? His sister shifted in her seat. Dad just means people who have something to protect. I see, I said. I opened the folder again, flipping back to the first page. And you believe I do not? No one answered that directly. Daniel's mother offered a soft, measured smile. We don't know enough about your financial situation. That's exactly the point. These things are best clarified ahead of time. Clarified, I repeated. I turned another page, scanning the language. Separate property clauses, limitations on claims, provisions that read less like mutual protection and more like a line drawn in advance. And who drafted this, I asked. Our family attorney, his father said. For both parties, I asked. A pause. Well, he said our attorney prepared the initial document. You would, of course, be free to have your own counsel review it. Of course, I said quietly. I closed the folder again and rested my hands on top of it. Daniel reached for his water glass and took a sip he didn't seem to need. His hand trembled just slightly. It's not personal, he said. They would ask this of anyone. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. Would you? I asked. He hesitated. That's not fair, he said. No, I agreed, it isn't. His mother leaned in, her tone still gentle but firmer now. We are not accusing you of anything. We are simply being responsible. Marriage is not just emotional, it is practical. I agree, I said. Her smile returned, relieved. Then you understand. I understand that you believe you are being practical, I said. What I am still trying to understand is what exactly you believe you are protecting your son from. The words landed more directly than anything I had said so far. His father's expression tightened. From complications, he said, from misunderstandings, from situations that become difficult to unwind later. Difficult for whom, I asked. For everyone involved, he replied. I nodded again as though this were a conversation I was taking seriously. Because I slid the folder a few inches back toward myself, not rejecting it, not accepting it, simply holding it in place. And Daniel, I said, turning back to him, you agreed to this. I didn't agree, he said quickly. I just didn't stop it. That's the same thing, I said. He flinched slightly, like a man who has just realized the weight of a small decision. I let the silence return just for a breath. Then I asked very evenly, what is the current value of Daniel's trust? The question shifted the air in the room immediately. His father blinked. I'm sorry. You mentioned protection, I said. I assume that includes existing assets. So I'm asking, what is the current value of his trust? Daniel's sister gave a short, surprised laugh. That's a little direct, don't you think? I'm being practical, I said. His father's mouth tightened. That's not something we discuss casually. And yet you are asking me to sign a legal document that would affect my future based on that information, I said. So I don't see how it can remain undisclosed. No one spoke for a moment. I continued, my tone unchanged. Is the house in Daniel's name or held in a family trust? That's not relevant, his father said. It is if we are discussing marital property, I replied. Daniel shifted in his chair. We don't need to go into all that tonight. We don't, I asked. His mother stepped in quickly. This is exactly why we wanted to have this conversation early, so that expectations are clear. Clear for whom, I asked again. Her smile thinned. I let my gaze move across the table, taking in each of them in turn. I'm also curious, I said, about Daniel's outstanding liabilities. Daniel's head snapped up. What? You have a credit line connected to the business you started 2 years ago, I said. Is that fully resolved? The color drained from his face. His sister looked at him sharply. What is she talking about? It's nothing, Daniel said quickly. It's handled. Is it? I asked, still calm. His father frowned. How would you know about that? I met his eyes. Because I listen, I said. The room had gone very still now. No one was eating anymore. The tree lights blinked quietly in the corner. Daniel stared at me, something like confusion and fear mixing behind his eyes. Why are you doing this? He asked. I considered that for a moment. Because you asked me to take this seriously, I said. His mother set her fork down carefully. This feels unnecessary. Does it? I asked. Yes, she said. We are trying to approach this in a respectful, structured way. And I am responding in the same way I said. Her expression hardened just a fraction. You are being defensive, she said. I am being thorough, I replied. His father leaned back in his chair, studying me now with a different kind of attention. What exactly do you do on base, he asked. There it was. Not curiosity. Recalculation. I held his gaze. More than filing paperwork, I said. Daniel let out a quiet breath. Can we just slow down for a second? No, I said gently. I don't think we should. He looked at me startled. Because this moment matters, I continued. And if we move past it too quickly, we'll pretend it didn't happen the way it actually did. His mother folded her hands in front of her. We have treated you with respect, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said quietly, you have treated me with caution. The difference seemed to land. No one spoke. I rested my hand lightly on the folder again. You are not wrong to want clarity, I said. You are not wrong to want fairness. Those are reasonable things. His father's shoulders relaxed slightly as though he thought we were moving toward agreement. But fairness requires information, I continued, on both sides. I slid the folder a little farther back toward the center of the table. And right now, I said, you don't have mine. Daniel's mother frowned. Then perhaps this is the time to share it. I looked at her. Then at Daniel. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute certainty. They still believed this conversation was happening on their terms. They still believed they were setting the conditions. They still believed I was the one who needed to prove something. I took a slow breath. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to consider what would happen next. Not as a reaction, as a decision. I straightened slightly in my chair, and I said very calmly, All right, I said again a little more firmly this time so there would be no misunderstanding. I folded my hands neatly on top of the contract. If we're going to have a serious conversation about fairness, then we should do it properly. Daniel's mother nodded once relieved, as if she believed I was finally stepping into the role she had prepared for me. Yes, she said, that's exactly what we're asking. I looked at Daniel first. Before I answer anything else, I said I need to understand something. He met my eyes uneasy. Okay. Why didn't you stop this? I asked. He swallowed. I told you I didn't want to cause a scene. A scene, I repeated quietly. I thought if we just got through dinner we could talk about it later, privately, without all this. All this, I said, glancing at the folder, was already decided. The only thing you postponed was telling me. He didn't answer. I let that settle between us. Then I turned to his parents. You said you want clarity, I continued, so let me offer you some. I sat back slightly in my chair, not in defiance, but in composure. I am 38 years old, I said. I have supported myself since I was 18. I do not carry personal debt. I own my home. I maintain my own retirement accounts. I do not depend on Daniel for financial stability, and I do not require access to your family's assets to live comfortably. Daniel's sister blinked, surprised. His father's eyes narrowed, reassessing. And as for my work, I added, you are correct that I am on base. I paused just long enough for the weight of that understatement to register. But not in the way you've assumed. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? I looked at him. Then I looked at his parents. And I spoke plainly. I am a Major General in the United States Marine Corps. For a moment, no one reacted. It was too far outside what they expected. Then his sister let out a short, disbelieving laugh. I'm sorry, what? I am a 2-star general, I said, my voice calm even. I command personnel, oversee operations, and make decisions that carry legal, financial, and human consequences. My responsibilities extend well beyond administrative duties. Daniel stared at me. You're serious, he said. Yes. His mother's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. That's not something one would hide. I didn't hide it, I said. I simply didn't lead with it. His father leaned forward, studying me in a way he hadn't before. If that's true, he said slowly, then why? Why am I sitting here in an old coat I finished for him? He didn't answer. I gave him the courtesy of finishing the thought anyway. Because I wanted to know how you would treat someone you believed had nothing to offer you. The words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Daniel looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. You never told me, he said quietly. No, I agreed, I didn't. Why, he asked. I held his gaze. Because I wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't shaped by rank, I said. I wanted to know if I could be known as a person before I was known as a title. His mother shook her head slightly. This feels misleading. Does it? I asked. Yes, she said. You allowed us to believe something that wasn't true. I allowed you to believe something you never questioned, I replied. His father sat back slowly. And now, he asked. Now, I said, we're having the conversation you wanted, with all the information on the table. I lifted the folder again, tapping it lightly. This document, I continued, is not inherently unreasonable. Prenuptial agreements can be useful when both parties enter them with full knowledge, independent counsel, and mutual respect. His mother nodded a bit too quickly. Exactly. But this, I said, opening it again and turning it so they could see, is not that. I pointed to a clause. This section assumes a disparity of income and restricts future claims accordingly. That assumption is incorrect. I turned another page. This provision limits access to certain assets without disclosing their structure. That creates an imbalance of information. Another page. And this language here, I added, tapping the margin note, is not legal at all. It's personal. It reflects a concern about character rather than a concern about assets. Daniel's sister shifted uncomfortably. His father frowned. Our attorney drafted that. Your attorney drafted a document based on your perspective, I said, not on a full understanding of both parties involved. And what would you suggest? He asked. I would suggest, I said calmly, that if we are to discuss a legal agreement, it should be drafted by separate counsel with full disclosure from both sides and with terms that protect each party equally. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line. And you expect us to simply accept that? She asked. I expect you to recognize that I am not the person you assumed I was, I said. The room went quiet again. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. You could start with the truth, I said. He looked at me pained. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to them, I said, and you let it matter without question. His father exhaled slowly. Well, he said, this is unexpected. Yes, I said, it is. His mother picked up her glass of wine, took a small sip, and set it back down carefully. If what you're saying is accurate, she said, then perhaps we all made some incorrect assumptions. That's one way to put it, I replied. Her eyes met mine. And you, she added, chose not to correct them. That's also true. A long pause followed. Then she said, I suppose the question now is where we go from here. I considered that. I looked at Daniel, at his father, at his mother, at the contract still resting between us. And I realized something that had nothing to do with rank or money or legal language. This was no longer about what they thought of me. It was about what I thought of them. I closed the folder gently and set it back on the table. You asked for clarity, I said. And now you have it. For a moment after I said it, no one moved. The contract sat in the center of the table like something that had lost its purpose. Daniel's mother was the first to recover. She adjusted her napkin, smoothed it once across her lap, and lifted her chin just slightly. Well, she said, her voice carefully measured, this certainly changes the context. Does it? I asked. Her eyes flickered, not expecting that answer. Of course it does. We were operating under a certain understanding. Yes, I said, you were. His father leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table. You have to admit, he said, most people would have disclosed something like that. Most people lead with whatever they think will secure their position, I replied. I chose not to. Daniel looked between us, his face pale. I still don't understand, he said. Why didn't you tell me, not just them, me? I turned to him fully. Because I needed to know who I was building a life with, I said. Not who you would become if you knew my rank. That's not fair, he said. No, I said quietly. What happened tonight wasn't fair. He flinched at that. His sister shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable now. Okay, but this feels like a test, she said. Like you set this up. I didn't set anything up, I said. I accepted an invitation. And showed up pretending to be someone else, she said. I held her gaze. I showed up without announcing myself. There was a difference. His mother exhaled slowly. Regardless, she said, we are where we are. And we still need to discuss the future. I nodded once. We do. She leaned forward slightly, regaining some of her composure. Then, let's be practical. If you truly are in the position you claim, then you understand the importance of structure. Agreements, boundaries. I do, I said. Then you must also understand that families like ours are not unique, I said, gently cutting her off. Her lips pressed together. I have spent my entire adult life working with people from every background you can imagine, I continued. Wealthy, poor, educated, not. What distinguishes them is not what they have, it's how they behave when they believe no one is watching. No one spoke. Daniel stared down at his hands. I shifted my attention back to him. Daniel, I said, my tone softer now, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. He looked up. When your parents decided to present this tonight, I said, tapping the folder lightly, did you agree with them? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I thought it was reasonable, he said finally, just as a precaution. Even knowing what you know about me, I asked. He hesitated. I didn't know this, he said, gesturing slightly toward me, toward everything I had just revealed. No, I said, but you knew me. That landed harder. He looked down again. I didn't think they were trying to hurt you, he said quietly. That's not what I asked, I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then slowly he said, I didn't stop them. I nodded once. That's what I needed to know. His mother leaned in quickly. Daniel was trying to keep the peace, she said. You can't fault him for that. I turned my head toward her. Yes, I said, I can. Her eyes widened slightly. Keeping the peace, I continued, at the expense of someone else's dignity, is not peace. It's avoidance. His father shifted in his chair. Now hold on, he said. No one intended to compromise your dignity. I met his gaze. You handed me a document designed to limit my place in your family before you understood who I was, I said. You made assumptions about my character based on what I wore, what I said, and what you believed I could offer. That's not, his sister began. It is, I said, still calm. The room fell quiet again. I let it. Then I did something none of them expected. I reached down, slipped the engagement ring from my finger, and placed it gently on the table beside the contract. The small sound it made against the wood seemed louder than anything else that night. Daniel's head snapped up. What are you doing? He asked. I'm pausing, I said. Pausing. His voice cracked slightly. You're taking the ring off in front of my family and calling it a pause. Yes, I said. Why? He demanded. I looked at him, not unkindly. Because I don't know if you're ready to stand beside me, I said, and I'm not willing to build a marriage on uncertainty. His mother's face tightened. This is an overreaction, she said. No, I replied, it's a decision. His father leaned forward, his voice firmer now. You're going to walk away from an engagement over a conversation. I'm stepping back, I corrected him, because of what that conversation revealed. Daniel shook his head, disbelief and hurt written across his face. You could have told me, he said again. And you could have trusted me, I said. That was the truth at the center of it. Not the contract. Not the dinner. Trust. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. Thank you for the meal, I said to his parents, my voice steady. It was very well prepared. His mother stared at me, speechless now. I picked up my coat from the chair where it had been placed earlier. The worn wool felt heavier in my hands than it had when I arrived. Before I turned to leave, I looked at Daniel one last time. I meant what I said, I told him. This isn't the end, but it's not the beginning anymore either. He didn't move. None of them did. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold December night. The air hit my face sharp and clean. Behind me, I heard the door close. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger. Not triumph. Loss. Because sometimes the hardest part of seeing people clearly is realizing they're not who you hoped they were. The first few days after Christmas were the quietest I could remember in years. Not the kind of quiet you get after a long day's work when you sit down with a cup of tea and let the world settle. This was a deeper kind, the kind that leaves space for thoughts you've been too busy to face. I went back to base on the morning of the 26th. The routine helped. There were briefings waiting, reports that needed review, a personnel issue that had been delayed over the holiday. In my world, decisions didn't pause because it was Christmas. People still depended on clarity, on direction, on someone willing to take responsibility. So I stepped back into that role without hesitation. In uniform, everything made sense. People stood when I entered a room. Conversations tightened. Information was presented directly. No one wondered what I contributed or whether I belonged at the table. My authority wasn't a question, it was a fact. There is comfort in that even if you don't admit it. But when I came home in the evenings, the silence returned. My townhouse felt larger than it had before. The small artificial tree still stood in the corner of the living room, lights unplugged, now ornaments, catching the faint glow from the street lamp outside. The pie Daniel had brought was still on the counter the first night. I threw it away the next morning. I didn't hear from him right away. That didn't surprise me. Daniel was not a man who rushed into difficult conversations. He approached them the way some people approach cold water, slowly, carefully, hoping to adjust before fully stepping in. On the third day he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't even know where to start, but I'm sorry. Please call me when you're ready." I listened to it once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of discipline. I had learned over the years that immediate responses often come from emotion, not clarity, and I wanted to understand what I felt before I tried to explain it to him. A week passed. Work filled most of it. Meetings, reviews, long hours that blurred into one another. There were moments when I forgot entirely about Christmas dinner, about the contract, about the look on Daniel's face when I placed the ring on the table. But then something small would bring it back. A couple holding hands in a parking lot, a wedding announcement in the paper, a Christmas card left unopened on my kitchen counter. By the second week, the calls stopped. Instead, a letter arrived. It was handwritten. I recognized his handwriting immediately, careful, slightly slanted the way he always wrote grocery lists. I set it on the table and looked at it for a long time before opening it. When I finally did, I read it slowly. He didn't try to defend himself. That was the first thing I noticed. He wrote about that night, about what he had seen and what he had failed to see. He admitted that he had known about the contract and had convinced himself it was just a formality. He admitted that he had been more concerned with avoiding conflict than with protecting me. "I thought I was being reasonable," he wrote. "I thought I was keeping things smooth. I didn't realize I was letting you walk into something unfair." He paused there, then continued. "I also didn't realize how much I liked the version of you I thought I knew." That line made me stop. He went on to explain it. He said it had been easier to feel steady, confident, even a little important beside someone he believed needed him. That he had never asked deeper questions about my work because he didn't want to disturb that balance. "I'm not proud of that," he wrote, "but it's true." I set the letter down for a moment and stared out the window. There it was. Not just an apology. Understanding. That mattered more than anything he could have said in the first few days. The next letter came 4 days later. This one was shorter. "I've started seeing someone," he wrote, "a counselor. I don't think I know how to handle my parents the way I should. I want to learn." He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He just told me what he was doing. That mattered too. By the third week, I had 3 letters. Each one a little clearer than the last. He wrote about his childhood, about the way his parents made decisions, about how disagreement was handled, not through open conflict, but through quiet pressure. He wrote about how he had learned to keep peace by stepping aside rather than standing up. "I thought that was maturity," he wrote. "I'm starting to see it was avoidance." I read that line twice. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. I didn't respond. Not yet. Around that same time, I received a call I hadn't expected. Daniel's mother. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "You're not," I replied. Another pause. "I wanted to follow up," she said, choosing her words carefully. "About Christmas." "Yes," I said. "I believe things may have been misunderstood," she continued. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "In what way?" I asked. "We were trying to be responsible," she said, "and perhaps the way we approached it was too direct." "Directness wasn't the issue," I said. She hesitated. "What was the issue in your view?" she asked. "Assumption," I said. Silence. Then more quietly, "I see." I wasn't sure she did. I also wanted to say, she added, that we were not aware of your position. I understand that, I said. And had we known, she continued, we would have handled things differently. I let that sit for a moment. Would you? I asked. She didn't answer right away. I would hope so, she said finally. That was honest in its way. Then perhaps the issue wasn't information, I said. It was perspective. Another silence. I suppose, she said slowly, there is some truth in that. We ended the call shortly after. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was movement. The real change came a few days later. A letter arrived from Daniel's father. Typed, not handwritten. Brief. I misjudged you, it read. Not because of what you withheld, but because of what I assumed. That is my responsibility. I regret the way that manifested. No explanations. No excuses. Just that. I read it once. Then I set it aside. It was enough. Not to repair everything, but to acknowledge something had been broken. The following week I called Daniel. We agreed to meet. Not at his parents' house. Not at mine. At a small diner just off the highway. The kind of place where the coffee is always hot, the booths are worn, and no one pays much attention to who you are. It felt right. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. And for the first time since Christmas, we sat down across from each other, with nothing between us. He looked thinner. Not in a way most people would notice right away, but I saw it. The lines around his eyes were a little deeper. His shoulders didn't sit as easily as they used to. There was something in his posture less certain, more deliberate. He waited until I had settled into the booth before he sat down again. A waitress came over, poured coffee for both of us without asking, and left us with 2 menus we didn't need. "Thank you for coming," he said again. "You said that already," I replied, not unkindly. "I know," he gave a small, nervous smile. "I just didn't want to assume." "That's new," I said. He nodded. "I'm trying." We let that sit for a moment. Outside, cars moved steadily along the road. Inside, the quiet hum of conversation and clinking dishes created a kind of privacy that didn't feel forced. Around us, older couples leaned toward each other, sharing stories, finishing meals they had probably ordered the same way for years. It grounded the moment. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I read your face that night," he said. "After the contract, I knew something had changed. I just didn't understand what." "You understand now?" I asked. He nodded slowly. More than I did. Not completely, but enough to know I was wrong. I didn't respond right away. He continued. "I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal," he said, "that it was just paperwork, that everyone does it." "Everyone doesn't," I said. "I know that now." He paused. "It wasn't the contract, was it?" "No," I said, "it wasn't." "It was me," he said. "It was what you didn't do," I corrected gently. He looked down at the table. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "A lot." I waited. "I always thought I was a good man," he continued, "and in a lot of ways I still think I am. But I've started to realize that being good when things are easy doesn't mean much." "No," I said quietly, "it doesn't." He met my eyes. "I didn't stand up for you," he said. "Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to deal with my parents. I told myself I'd fix it later privately, but by then the damage was already done." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him. But belief, I had learned, was not the same as trust. "What have you done since then?" I asked. He seemed relieved by the question, grounded by it. "I've been seeing a counselor," he said, like I wrote, twice a week at first, now once. I nodded. "I didn't realize how much of my life I've spent trying to keep things smooth," he went on. "How much I avoid conflict, especially with my parents." "That's not uncommon," I said. "I know," he replied. "But it's not something I want to keep doing." He took a breath. "I met with a lawyer too," he added. "Not my parents' attorney, my own." That caught my attention. And I asked. He explained what a fair agreement actually looks like, Daniel said. Mutual disclosure, separate representation, terms that protect both people, not just one. "That's correct," I said. I didn't know that he admitted, I just assumed my parents did. "Assumption seems to run in your family," I said. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Yeah, I've noticed." We sat quietly for a moment, both of us absorbing what had been said. Finally, he looked at me again. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "Not yet. I know I don't have that right." I appreciated that. "I just wanted you to know I'm working on it," he continued. "On myself, on how I handle things, on how I show up." I studied him. He wasn't trying to persuade me. He wasn't trying to charm his way back into place. He was simply telling the truth as he understood it. That was new. "What about your parents?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "That's been harder," he said. "But I've started setting boundaries." "In what way?" "I told them I wouldn't discuss our relationship unless you were present," he said. "And that if we ever move forward again, decisions like that," he nodded toward the invisible memory of the contract, "won't happen without both of us involved from the beginning." "And how did they respond?" I asked. "My mom was upset," he admitted. "My dad didn't say much at first. But he wrote you that letter." "I received it," I said. He nodded. "He doesn't apologize easily," Daniel said. "That was a lot for him." "I know," I said. We fell into another quiet. The waitress came back, refilled our coffee, and asked if we wanted anything else. We both shook our heads. When she left, Daniel spoke again. "I don't expect you to trust me right now," he said. "I just want the chance to become someone you can trust again." I let that sit between us. Outside, a truck passed its headlights, sweeping briefly across the window. "Trust isn't something you ask for," I said finally. "It's something you build." "I know," he said. "And it takes time," I added. "I have time," he replied. I looked at him for a long moment. There was no certainty in what I felt. No clear answer. But there was something else. Possibility. "I'm not ready to decide anything today," I said. "I understand," he said. "But I am willing to keep talking," I continued. Relief moved across his face, quiet but unmistakable. "Thank you," he said. I nodded once. We finished our coffee in a more comfortable silence than before. When we stood to leave, he didn't reach for my hand. He didn't try to close the distance. He simply walked beside me to the door. Outside, the air was cold again, though not as sharp as it had been on Christmas Eve. We stood there for a moment. "Same place next week?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He smiled, small and genuine. "I'll be here," he said. "I know," I replied. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Not that everything would be easy. Not that everything would be fixed. But that sometimes people can learn. If this story made you pause even for a moment and think about how we treat others when we believe they have nothing to offer, then it's already done something meaningful. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever realized you underestimated someone else, you're not alone. Stories like this remind us that respect isn't earned through titles or wealth, it's revealed through behavior. If this resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you'd like to hear more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of truth that changes people slowly, you're always welcome here.